Hi guys and welcome back. So today I'm going to be showing you how to install the ZR-TEC fork covers for the VS1400. Don't forget that these guys also offer them for the 800, the 750, and I believe they can do them for the 600 as well. So if you have one of those bikes, maybe get in touch with them and see if they can help you out. You don't need any specialist tools to install these. You will need a couple of Torx bits, Allen bolts, etc. and a socket or two to remove the front forks. But apart from that, there's no nuts or bolts on these things. They're plug and play. So let's get into it. We need to jack the front of the bike up. So if you haven't got one, you need to go and grab yourself a jack or some sort of blocking that you can put the bike on. Make sure it's safe and secure before you go putting wrenches on things and whatnot. We need to remove the front wheel, drop the forks, and then reinstall everything. First thing we need to do is remove the brake caliper from the disc. So let's get on with that now. So for this, you're going to need an 8mm Torx or Allen key for these bolts here. You can do this by hand, obviously. There we are. And the caliper should wiggle free. If it's a bit tough, it should be quite tough because the pads are gripping the disc. Just give it a little knock here with a soft mallet on the bottom edge, just in this direction, just to get a bit of vibration through it, and it will slide free. Now we can jack the bike up and start working on the wheel. So before I move on, I'm going to take the brake caliper, put zip tie through it, and I'm just going to attach that like so to the handlebar, just so it's not swinging around and knocking things about. So we've got a lock bolt down here at the bottom of the left-hand fork. We need to remove that first, and then we can remove the axle. Okay, so it might be different on yours, but mine is a Torx bit and it's a 5mm. Next, we're going to need a 12mm hex or Torx bit to take out the axle. Hoping this will come through with the impact driver, but it has been torqued down. Nope. Remember that you're on a jack right now, so any pressure you're putting on anything, you run the risk of knocking the bike over, so make sure the bike is secure. You can use a ratchet strap on the jack that you're using, or get somebody else to hold the bike while you're putting pressure and torque on nuts and bolts like this. Okay, so the wheel's nearly free. Going to switch over to the socket again. We need to make sure before we go any further that the bike is not going to tip backwards when we take the front wheel off. So let's get some blocking and we'll put it under the rear wheel, because if we remove this tyre right now, that's quite heavy and the bike's jacked up, so it might shift its weight to the back wheel. So we've got this void at the rear wheel. What we need to do before we take the front wheel off altogether is make sure that there is no space under the wheel. So we're going to use some blocking just to pop that under the wheel. Because the jack has got the bike in the air, if we remove weight from the front of the bike, the rear of the bike is going to shift. The weight of the bike is going to shift to the rear. So we need to make sure that when we drop that front wheel, that this bike isn't going to fall backwards. So now that the rear wheel has been chocked, we can continue by hand to take out the front axle. There we go. And there we are. Now we can take off the fender and we can remove the forks. The bolts that I've got holding on the fender are a 4mm Allen Torx. And it's always a good idea that when you're putting this all back together, make sure you put the fender on first before the wheel, because you will never get a tool in here, especially to these top bolts up here, to get the fender torqued down. So the next thing we need to do is remove these caps. These are just caps, ladies and gents. On conventional tubes, this will actually be a stopper cap, and if you were to remove it on a standard fork, the spring would want to come out, but these are not stopper nuts. The stopper is actually in here and the spring is after that. So do not be afraid of taking this nut off. I just hope that whoever had the bike before you remembered to put the internal cap on, so always be wary. But these are actually used to sort of clamp the fork into the top yoke. Well, that's not going to work, is it? You're going to need a 27mm socket to go on these caps. Now remember, anytime you put any sort of wrench, torque or anything on a bike that's on a jack, you need to make sure that the bike is secure and that the jack is secure. If I start wrenching on this right now without putting an extra hand on the bike, chances are, because I'm going this direction, I'm going to be affecting the way the bike sits on the jack and potentially cause it to fall off. And we really don't want to do that. Probably would have been smarter to crack these free while the bike was on the floor, but I won't tell if you won't. Use impact. If you have an impact driver that will go on there, that would be a really good help. The impact driver that I've got won't fit in between the handlebar and the nut, otherwise I would use it. So I'm going to go the old school method, mallet on the end of the socket and just give it some vibration, some shock, and there we go, it is free. So something to bear in mind there, before you start this job, go ahead and just crack those nuts free. We can now do the other side. Same process as before. Now both of these nuts can come off altogether. There we are. You see how it's just a cap with a rubber gasket? The stopper is actually on the inside. Okay, so the next step, you're going to need to remove the lower yoke bolts, and this is an 8mm. Now the fork is effectively free. It's a very snug fit, which is why it won't just drop out. So we're going to need to give it some encouragement from the top, but we need to remove the other side as well. So this is the top view of the fork. As you can see, we have a Torx bit in there. We need to find the right size. Hex 14mm torque Allen in the top that you can see there. That is a 14mm. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to put a long driver in there and just tap it. There you go, with a hammer. And you can see how the fork dropped out. Wouldn't be a bad idea at this point, ladies and gents, to have something on the floor if you're doing this for the first time, because if that fork falls out all the way, it's going to slam onto the floor. So a rag or something, you know, or if you're not doing it with loads of camera equipment and tripods, hold on to it while you're tapping it with the hammer, you know, think things through. So another thing that I see people do is that when they remove this fork, they don't take into consideration that the weight is shifting over to this side of the triple tree. So inevitably this should or would swing to one side. So always a good practice to move it before you start removing the fork. So whatever side the triple tree is on, whatever weight, whichever lock it's on, either left or right, the opposing fork is the one that you want to remove first. There we are. See how that dropped out right there? Should be able to get a hand on that now and maneuver it free. Okay, so now we're ready to install the fork cover. It is really as simple as sliding onto the bottom yoke and it takes position as it needs to. One thing to bear in note is that it has got internal components that are hollow. So when we put the fork up through the bottom of that cover, we need to make sure we're aligning the fork as best we can. If we go off to one side like so, it's not going to go through that hole there. So we need to make sure when we're installing, we go as straight as possible in order to slide that cover onto the top of the fork. We're going to place the fork cover into its location best we can, and we'll maneuver it around when we're installing, and then we can take the fork and very carefully go up as straight as we can, find the bottom yoke, which we've just done, and then we need to maneuver the fork cover around so that we can, there we go, slide the tube up even further. We want to keep going now, and now we're at the top yoke. I'm going to move the camera so you can see. So there's a bit of movement at the moment. The yoke's not, sorry, the fork's not come all the way up yet. But if we look down, we'll be able to see the top of the fork. So we can use that as a guide. Hold on to the bottom of the fork, and if we arrange things, there we are, we can find the top of the fork, keep sliding, and there we are, and now we're home. We want to make sure that when the fork comes up, it is seated correctly inside that ridge on the inside of the triple tree. But that now is installed. Let's do the other one. That cutout for the lower bolt is facing the rear. Pop the fork cover on. There we are. Take the tube up through the bottom, find the lower yoke, line it up as best we can, push all the way up, and align the fork. And there we are. Okay, so now that that's done, we can go ahead and put our caps back on. 27mm. And we can torque those down properly when the bike's on the floor. The spacer, you'll see how it's got like a butt end, it's got a ridge on it there. That actually goes into the fork, so we want it in this orientation. This section here, down to this flange, that goes into the hub on the wheel. We need to make sure we've got our speedo ready to go. The first thing I'm going to do is take the axle and just start it off there. The reason I want to do that is because I can bring the speedo down and put the speedo onto the axle. We can then maneuver the forks, and we can try our best to lift that wheel up into the fender and then push that axle through. And make sure that that speedo is sat correctly there. Okay, now we're going to need the spacer on the other side. Just tap that through with the mallet, keeping an eye on the spacer. We can lift it up into place. Now we don't want to go smacking that anymore, because now we're on to the thread on the other side, on the fork. Now that that's in place, we can take our 12mm, just using it in little blips, just to get the job done a bit quicker. And there we are. We need to put the locking bolt in. Refer to the workshop manual for the torque settings on all of these bolts. And there we are. Now we can put the brake caliper back on, and the job's a good one. Slide her into position. Now with these bolts, please make sure you put Loctite on them and torque them down correctly. I'm not putting Loctite on them at the moment because this front end, the caliper, is being replaced with a Taheco 6-pot, which I will do a video on for you if you want to know how to upgrade your front brake. Okay guys, and that's it. Thanks again for tuning in, and huge thanks to ZR-TEC for sending these over. If you do want a set of these forks, they have very generously sent over a discount for you guys. You will get 10% off when you use the code HAGARMOTO. So be sure to take advantage of that if you do want a set of these fork covers. They offer the aluminium polish ones, the powder coated black gloss, and the matte black as well. We are going to be launching a chance for you guys to grab yourself a free set of these, and that's the black gloss powder coated ones that are actually sat on my bench right now. But for now guys, thanks again for the support. We broke 1,000 subscribers yesterday, which is absolutely phenomenal. You guys have been great right from the beginning. I'm just going to keep going. You guys seem to enjoy the content, so yeah. Thank you very much. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video. All the best.